we have an amazing feature in Genii this month, which is about Covent Garden magicians. And I thought it would be wonderful for all our readers to get a chance to meet the author of that piece and the Covent Garden magician himself, who he's writing about in his education on the streets of Covent Garden. And secretly, I wanted to do this because I wanted to meet him, because we almost met in London at a convention. He was nice enough after I was there to say, oh, I should have said hello, but I saw you on stage, and I was wondering if you were interested in an article about this group of Covent Garden magicians. And it turns out to be an amazing story. Yes, you've seen street magicians. You all know a little bit about street magic. Maybe some of you have done it. But it turns out that there's a community of street magicians in Covent Garden in the center of London's tourist area. And they've sort of figured out their own system of how they're doing it, their own friendships, their own support system. And Laurence has been part of that. This is Laurence Gibbons, who is also known as Abel of Cain and Abel, the performing team. And he wrote our feature about Covent Garden. So we have hooked up with him in the most painful way possible, technologically, so that we can meet him as he's working on a cruise ship in the Caribbean. So Laurence, thanks for doing this, and thanks for agreeing to be part of this. I appreciate your help with this. The surprise to me, I can only do the cliches about street magicians. I've seen them and admired them over the years. But I always think, oh, that's what you do when you can't do anything else, and that's how you learn it. And then hopefully you get good enough that you go and get a real job somewhere, a real performance job somewhere. But it was surprising to me that you had done these, including these cruise ships, and then you decided what you wanted to do was work on the street. And it was just interesting that you've kind of put all those pieces together. And I think what you're saying, what you're telling us, is a lot of performers do it that way.
Absolutely, yeah. It's addictive, I think, doing street shows. It's very, very difficult. I think the time that I first stepped into Covent Garden to perform, I'd been doing magic for 10 years. And I'd done magic outside at sort of fetes and festivals and fairs. And I'd done close-up magic gigs. And I'd done little theatre tours and things like that. And I thought, it's just the same. I'll just step out onto the street and I'll do my show, and everyone will love it and find it interesting. And wow, it is not that. It's very humbling. You stand there with your little box of tricks and your microphone on, and you start talking and you try and build a crowd and pull people in, and that's difficult. And then you might get them in, and then they hopefully will stay. But every street performer's gone through the whole thing of you manage to get a crowd, but then you lose that crowd. So those are the real things you've got to learn is how to build an audience, how to keep an audience, and how to make them pay. And for me, I think it took months, honestly, to do it. I just moved to London. I was working at that point, writing for a food and drink magazine, and trying to get magic as a full-time career, which luckily it is for me and my brother now. But at that point, Covent Garden was an area that I could just go and do. No one was stopping me doing it. So I went, I think I was doing Saturday and Sunday in Covent Garden, and then 9 to 5, Monday to Friday in the office. And I just went, and I did just die on my arse for weeks on end, every weekend. My girlfriend at the time was like, why are you doing this? Can't we just go out for a nice lunch? No, I've got to go and hang out with all these, to her, weird magicians.
Right.
But it's the community, I think, that kept me there, Jim. I went, and there is one of the sort of cliches with street performers is that they are not particularly welcoming, because the fact of the matter is, if you are the only person performing on the pitch that day, you can do as many shows as you want. But if there's 6 or 7 people, every new person that arrives restricts the amount of shows you can do and the amount of money you can make. So it's quite natural for a lot of street performers to be wary of new people coming.
Right.
Covent Garden and the area that I've always performed in, Magic Corner, I just found is the most welcoming place. I remember finishing my first show, and a guy who I'd been a bit intimidated by came up, shook my hand, and went, "Welcome to Covent Garden," and
yeah.
I kind of needed that handshake and that blessing and that welcome. Magic Sam Hurst is obviously in the article, and he's one of my best friends. And I met him on the street. I just was walking through Covent Garden. I watched his show, and I think I might have met him at Blackpool Magic Convention years before. And I just sort of went over to say hi, and he was just a lovely guy. And he was like, "You should try this." And the people there are very supportive of you. If you come and you genuinely want to be able to do a street show, people will be really, really supportive in Magic Corner.
Right.
We've had people come, and they put up their little phone and they just want to film content, and people are a little bit more weary of that.
Right.
It's
they're not really working there. They just want credit for working there. Yeah.
That's it. But yeah, if you're willing to come there and you get your half an hour and do your show, if you can do a show, whatever, people will be as encouraging as you could wish for, I think, in Covent.
It's interesting you talk about the competition in the system, and people who read the article will see. What surprised me a little is that there's really a system, and I suppose that's kind of done out of politeness primarily. I mean, it's really to kind of put order to this chaos. You don't just have people wandering around doing shows. There's a queue, and you go back in the queue, and you're working with the other performers, so that there's a cycle of people working.
Yeah, so there's three major pitches in Covent Garden. There's the West Piazza and there's the North Hall. The North Hall is where sort of big circus acts tend to start. They might be doing a tightrope walk or a unicycle, or climbing up a ladder and juggling, and they'll progress to the West Piazza. Escape artists will potentially work in those areas, and some magicians do. A good friend of mine, Paul DeBeck, only ever worked in those venues because he had this massive big show.
Yeah.
But Magic Corner and those two pitches, you have to put your pass into a drawer, and that is done a week in advance, so the show's for a week.
Right.
Magic Corner is the Wild West. You rock up in the morning, and there is a scruffy piece of paper stuck to a lamppost, and you write your name on it. And if there isn't a scruffy piece of paper stuck to a lamppost, you find a scruffy piece of paper, you write your name on it, and you stick it to a lamppost, and then you're number one in the queue at that point. And then you can start your show. And if somebody arrives before the end of your show, they will put their name down, and so on and so forth. Typically, when the weekends are the big days in Covent Garden, and I would typically only really ever go down and do Saturday, Sunday shows, and you could have anywhere from between sort of 5, 6, or 7 other magicians on. So you are doing your show, and then you've got to hang around for 3 hours or so whilst these other shows happen before you can do your next show.
Right. And
I always like to do at least 2 shows, because the first show, it's earlier in the day. The people in Covent Garden are kind of only really getting used to the fact that they're there. You're kind of still warming up, even if you've done a show the day before. So the first show would be a good show. The second show is normally the best one. And then if you've got stamina to wait around, I would like to do a third one.
Right.
And that is where naturally the clientele and the people who are in Covent Garden change from very much families on a day out, going to the theatre, going to eat M&Ms at M&M World or whatever the hell they do.
Right.
And then when you get to sort of 5:30, 6 o'clock, you do have more people who are out, big groups drinking or whatever, and they might stop, and they're actually a respectable, fun crowd.
That's great. And you talk about how the show might be great, but then you always got another way to judge it at the end of the show as well, right? Meaning what's in the hat.
Absolutely. It's all about what's in the hat, unfortunately.
Right.
You can build a wonderful crowd. I would always have one child that would help in my show. And that was pretty much my build. I would kind of bring them up. I would normally do a tour de restorative with them, and then I would go into a billing selected piece of fruit, and the fruit is being thrown out amongst the audience. But then at the very center point is this kid, and the kid is there, and they've got to go get some money off their parent to bring back, and that ends up in a banana, an orange, or an apple, or whatever.
Right.
And you can have the most wonderful kid their family's really into it, and then you've got these little vocal points, these little center points in your audience, maybe 3 or 4 big groups, and you brought them in and they're smiling, and they're laughing, and they're clapping, and they're having a great time. If they don't pay, you go, oh, well, maybe that wasn't as good as I thought it was.
Right.
So unfortunately, yeah, it does all come down to counting what people have put in the hat, you know, and everyone knows their biggest hat they've ever had. Everyone knows their biggest individual drop that they've ever had from someone. And it isn't about the money, the reason for going there. For me,
Right.
it was a place that I could go and perform, and the camaraderie of everybody else that is there. And also, if I had didn't have many gigs, it's somewhere that you can go and you still feel like you're doing magic and you get success.
And it's really
you get so much out of it.
It's really the acid test, isn't it? I mean, you're doing cruise ships and you're doing comedy clubs and you're doing all sorts of other shows. But I mean, I get the idea that it's one of those things that if you can do it there, you kind of know the rules of being able to get an audience anywhere, to be able to hold an audience. And that, those other shows, are they easier because of that? Are they just different because of that? You know, how does the street performing relate to working on a cruise ship?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's certainly similarities because the audiences that I will perform to on a cruise ship, yes, they get a little paper through their door the night before that says, Cain and Abel are performing in the theatre tomorrow night.
Right.
And they think...
Go ahead.
And they think, oh, we'll go and watch that. But you are still essentially just 45 minutes of their holiday, and they've ambled into a theatre to watch it.
Right.
And although they are engaged, they're not super engaged in who you are, and they haven't booked a ticket to come and see you in their local town. In Covent Garden, people are walking through, they're maybe on their holiday, or they're on their city break, or they live in London, and you've got to engage as quickly as possible with everyone enough that they think, I am going to spend this portion of my day watching this.
Right.
And they buy into it, and they think, I'm enjoying what this person is doing. I like the act. They're engaging. So there are similarities. But the main thing is, in Covent Garden or any street pitch, you have things such as you'll have a rowdy stag or hen crew, or you might have football fans.
Right.
There's a lot of football matches on in London, and so you might have some travelling fans down. Certainly when the Rugby Six Nations or if there's a World Cup on, people do use Covent Garden as an area to come and drink and be rowdy, and that can just totally ruin your show. A loud dog can just ruin your show.
Right.
In Covent Garden.
Right.
You don't have any of those. So actually, if you've just got one person that's maybe chatting to the person that they're sat with in a theatre, you've had to overcome so many bigger irritations than that.
Right.
That when you're in a venue, whether it's a cruise ship or comedy club or whatever, you're like, well, this is easy to get this person. This is one person I need to get back on side and stop talking and engage in the show. That's a lot easier than, okay, here's 20 people making loads of noise and 2 dogs fighting, or another street performer who's maybe new to the game and doesn't know that there's designated pitches for them to be playing their guitar, and they just pitch up near you and they're playing the guitar, and that's a disruptive. And you have to also deal with these in an authoritative way, but also in a really friendly, lovely way, because if you accidentally show face that you're grumpy and miserable, people aren't going to stay and watch the rest of the street show. So it does, having a really, really unengaged audience as you do on the street. These are people that are shopping, they don't want to stop, they don't want to pay money, at their very essence. When you are there in any room with any level of engaged audience, you learn how to deal with that, and I think it does improve you as a performer by going through that. What is a very humbling process, I think, trying to get an audience to stop and care on the street. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it's got to be like the oldest way that anyone ever performed, and it's amazing that it's still not only there, but in this really historic area. I mean, you write a little bit about the history of Covent Garden as well, and how what's all happened there, how that all was the centerpiece of London community at one time. And you know, the trends were set there, the styles were set there, and that's still where the tourists go and you know, encounter entertainers today. So
Absolutely, yeah. You know, there's a pub, the Punch and Judy pub, that is named because this is where the first recorded street performance was a Punch and Judy show. And you know, that was in the 1600s. You know, so the street performers have been coming here ever since. The area has, you know, it was originally a place for royalty, but you know, when they were driven out of Covent Garden, the artists, and they came in, you know, and it has gone through these changes. You know, it's a place with posh, fancy shops, and people are there to buy, you know, designer handbags or whatever. Having all of the theatres around, you do have these people who their sole reason for coming to Covent Garden is to watch, you know, Wicked or The Lion King or you know, whatever, and they're there to see live entertainment that evening or that afternoon in a big theatre. So when they walk past someone doing it on the street, they're like, well, this is what we want. This is what we want to see. And you know, it is. There has been issues, and there will always be issues with Westminster Council wanting to control it a little bit more. You know, there's a decibel level that they bring in, that they have people that come around and record, make sure we're not making too much noise.
Oh, wow.
You know, we're speaking here on Apple products, so I can't talk too badly about them, but the Apple store.
Oh, really? They're They're fussy.
It's right by Magic Corner, and if you're making too much noise, they will send these council officers down to shut it down. You know, if your crowd is so big that it's by their doorway, they will make a fuss about that as well. So, you know, you've got these huge brands and these huge businesses who are paying so much money to rent these, you know, premises and sell their wares. And they, you know, they do seem to be a bigger voice a lot of the time in trying to control things there. But it's such a huge community, the Covent Garden street performers, that, you know, they really have put their foot down and made sure that, you know, they are protected and that they are still a part of it, because it is a part of that London history. It's a part of Covent Garden's history. Street performers have been there. People go there for it. When I first started doing magic, my grandparents were a magic act, so they gave me, you know, all these magic books and old magic magazines, even Genii magazines. The first ones I read were printed before I was born, and my granddad passed down to me. And my dad, so it's my mum's parents who did the magic. My dad just he didn't have anything that he felt he could offer us, but he'd always gone to London and he visited Covent Garden as a kid. So he took me and my brother down to Covent Garden, and we just spent the afternoon watching street shows. We went to Davenport's magic shop, and it was, you know, it was something that he just knew they'll be there. You know, he didn't go on the internet and check our street performers still in Covent Garden. He just got off the train how he'd remembered doing it 20 years before, and we just wandered down, and there they all are. And, you know, on any given day in Covent Garden, you can see the cups and balls, you can see someone escape from a straitjacket, you can see someone walking on a tightrope, you can see unicyclists juggling knives, you can see unbelievable mime and really like beautiful sort of bits of, you know, dance and mime. You see classical music, and you can see break dancers. You know, it's every kind of performance art is happening in Covent Garden, and the surrounding areas. You know, Trafalgar Square and Leicester Square are also, people will go down there and do those other pitches as well. So yeah, it's great that performers are still there, and they are still fighting, and they are still making a living doing it.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. I mean, I've been there and admired those performers, but I have to tell you, my whole perspective of it changed after reading your story and reading about what you and your friends are doing there. And I'll be back, and the first thing I'm going to do is look for you guys, the cast of characters that you included. I mean, it's really, I kind of feel like I know them a little more now, and you kind of understand what those people are doing, and it's really inspiring. I think it's inspiring to a lot of people who just have a sense of that and don't necessarily understand all the pieces that go into it. So it's great. I know our readers will enjoy it. Hey, thanks very much for doing this. Thanks for writing the story, number one. Please say hi to your brother and say hi to those guys when you get back to London. And good luck on the cruise ship.
I will do, yeah, and they're all delighted. A lot of magicians will get featured in magazines or whatever, but there isn't that much of a look on street performing. So yeah, a lot of these guys who I messaged to speak to for the article, they were firstly really amazed that Genii wanted to cover it. So it's really cool. And yeah, everyone's delighted.
So I got it. The old days of Genii, they used to say, "Oh, please tell advertisers that you saw the ad in Genii," because they wanted to promote all that stuff. So yeah, I have to tell our readers now that when you're in Covent Garden and you see these guys, you say, "Hey, I read about you in Genii magazine." So that does us a favor, and that's a little pat on the back for them too. So that's great. Hey, thanks so much, Laurence. This was really fun, and I appreciate you putting this all together for us.
It's a pleasure. Cheers, Jim.
Thanks very much.